Hello ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. Let's talk about the crisis in physics and its cause. I have here the course by David Harriman, given at the Ayn Rand Institute Lecture Series 2003. You can obtain this online at the AynRandBookstore.com. Now I'm going to quote briefly from it by actually recording the audio so that you can hear for yourself what he says. But first let me give just an indication. People point out that quantum mechanics works. As it turns out, scientists have discarded cause and effect and have adopted a view that we can't know the cause, thus the reason for statistics. Statistics rule everything in physics. Now, part of the reason for that is because we don't know what the underlying cause is. Statistics tells you something, but it's not a cause and effect relationship. The problem with modern science isn't that they've gotten a few answers right by studying the statistics. The problem with modern science is that they have discarded a view of cause and effect. And I can understand completely how even an objectivist would be skeptical about this. I mean, come on, it's science. Studying what the objectivists had to say about physics, once I became interested in the subject, I was astonished to hear what I heard about it, the berating of modern physics. Now, as an objectivist, I thought it was very odd indeed, that logic should rule the world and reality, and my mind and everything else, except the subatomic world. Now, why would the subatomic world be an exception? Now, I don't just mean that subatomic physics is weird or bizarre or strange. I received a comment, for example, that says, how can you expect that our minds would evolve to understand that? Our minds have evolved in the macro-universe area, not in a micro-universe area. So if there's strange things going on in the subatomic realm, how could we ever understand? Now, that's not at all getting at the point. The point is philosophy that has gotten into physics that isn't true because it cannot be true. So the crisis in physics today consists of philosophical beliefs held by scientists that are impossible. For example, the universe is a hologram, or the universe is a soccer ball, or the universe is a hologram of a soccer ball. And science today is getting really mystical, really irrational, kind of like it was in Germany before the Nazis took power and when the Nazis were in power. For example, today we have authors and scientists who actually publish books and make movies asserting things like there are infinite numbers of universes, or string theory. Everybody's heard of string theory. Now, if it cannot be tested, it's not science. If it makes absolutely no predictions that could be observed in reality, it's not science. That's called fantasy. Okay? And there's no such thing as taking a piece of fantasy and pushing it far enough to where you get real-life observations out of it. You have to start with reality and deduce from there. You can't start with a complete fantasy, like maybe there's 9 dimensions, but 6 of them are curled up in little tiny circles, and we're only living in these 3 dimensions plus time. That's a fantasy. That's out of a Piers Anthony book. The idea that there could be multiple universes, first of all, the word universe means everything that exists. So whatever it means to have multiple things of everything that exists, that's mystical. But second of all, how could you ever possibly test it? What evidence could there ever possibly be? Even mathematical evidence. What could you ever possibly have? So there's absolutely no way to test, predict, or know if there are other universes because we're stuck inside this one. Now, to contemplate that there are other universes is as idle and useless as to contemplate gremlins on the far side of the moon or how many angels can stand on the head of a pin. Yet that's the state of science today. I completely understand, even objectivists would take me skeptically. Quantum logic is different from regular logic, right? You can have multiple outcomes of the same event, and yet only one of them becomes real when we observe it. They never observed the ones that didn't come real, so how do they know? Really strange assertions that can never be tested and certainly can't be proved are the basis of a lot of theories today. That's what I'm against. Now, quantum physics works well for us today because we've got so many statistics gathered over such a long time. Can you imagine how much more we would be able to do with it if we had a rational scientific approach? That would be amazing. So, with no further ado, let's take a few quotes from David Harriman's The Crisis in Physics.
Good evening. Science is remarkably young. Although people have been around for tens of thousands of years, Galileo was the first physicist, and he lived only 400 years ago. Now ask yourself why. If scientific knowledge is so enormously practical and so crucial to our well-being, why were there no scientists until the last few centuries? Now obviously certain conditions must be satisfied before we can have science, and they weren't satisfied until the 17th century. For now, my point is that science is more fragile than most people realize. It is like a living thing that needs very specific conditions in order to survive and grow. And my theme tonight is, those conditions no longer exist. Galileo's most famous battle was with the church. But in fact, Galileo's battle was fought on two fronts, with dogmatic mysticism on one side and dogmatic skepticism on the other. Qua mystics, the enemies of science, told Galileo that faith was the only means to truth. Qua skeptics, they told him that man's senses and reasoning mind are capable only of devising convenient descriptions of appearances, and man can never hope to penetrate to the real nature of things. Now, both doctrines, mysticism and skepticism, demanded of Galileo that he renounce his request to use reason to understand the world. In an extraordinary act of heroism, he refused to give up. In 1612, Galileo wrote, quote, "Philosophical astronomers go beyond the demand that they somehow save the appearances and seek to investigate the true constitution of the universe, the most important and most admirable problem that there is. For such a constitution exists. It is unique, true, real, and could not possibly be otherwise." Unquote. Now, we all know the reward Galileo received for opening the door to the scientific era. He was convicted of heresy and spent the last 8 years of his life under house arrest, forbidden to speak or write about his ideas on astronomy. Even so, he won his battle. In fact, Galileo had inaugurated what we call the Age of Reason. The historic result was an explosive increase in knowledge, leading to unprecedented advances in man's ability to harness nature for his purposes. The spectacular, accelerating series of discoveries in physics fueled equally spectacular progress in other sciences and technology. Now, unfortunately, the Age of Reason is long since past, and today we live in a very different era. So I want to raise the question, have physicists preserved Galileo's hard-fought victory? Or have the opponents of reason managed to regroup and stage a comeback? Now, during the last century, did physicists continue pursuing the great and noble goal of discovering the true constitution of the universe? Or did they succumb to the idea that science cannot discover the truth about the physical world and therefore must only offer mathematical descriptions of appearances?